blazing fires, raging adrenaline, and total anarchy, all within the walls of a federal prison. FBI tactical teams and negotiators work around the clock, trying to avoid a small-scale war and keep nearly 100 hostages alive.
In the 1980s, the federal penitentiary in Atlanta housed some of the country's most notorious prisoners. 1,800 Cubans fleeing Castro's regime. 400 were hardened criminals. 200 were insane. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Castro called them undesirables. The U.S. government called them detainees. In 1987, they staged a bloody revolt. Now the FBI and special operations teams must infiltrate a burning prison to stop the violence before it rages out of control.
Cuba, 1980. A plummeting economy and political unrest prompt Fidel Castro to allow Cuban citizens to leave the country. For the first time in history, the notorious dictator permits American boats to enter Cuba's Mariel Harbor. In a 5-month period, over 120,000 undocumented refugees flee the country, heading for Florida. 2,700 are considered criminals or mentally ill under U.S. law. The Attorney General instructs the Bureau of Prisons to find space for them in America's already overcrowded prison system. 1,000 Cuban refugees are sent to the Federal Detention Center in Oakdale, Louisiana. Nearly 1,400 are transported to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. For 7 years, the U.S. and Cuban governments negotiate to send the criminals and mentally ill refugees back to Cuba. On November 20th, 1987, the State Department strikes a treaty with Cuba. Over 2,700 Cuban detainees will be sent back. Within 24 hours, Cuban detainees in both prisons get news of the decision. In Oakdale, Louisiana, 1,000 of them riot, taking 28 prison guards hostage. But at the Atlanta Penitentiary, all is quiet. Warden Joe Petrovsky.
There was a trust between the detainees and the correctional officers, and that trust was basically the treatment that the detainees got from the correctional officers.
Early Monday morning, 3 days after the treaty is signed, prison employee Ted Manier arrives at work. He notices an eerie silence.
There were hardly any inmates in the breakfast area. And normally it would be full of inmates were making a lot of noise and talking, and there was hardly anybody in there, so it was really quiet, unusually quiet.
On the first floor of the Prison Industries building, detainees make mattresses. On the surface, it looks like business as usual. But in an instant, detainees overpower their guards and ignite fires. On the third floor of the Industries building, Manier and his supervisor oversee a furniture-making shop. In a matter of minutes, the riot spreads to the rest of the floors.
It sounded like a roar, and it was coming up the stairwell. they got the door down. And they just came running in. And they had these hoods over their head, like they were made out of gray t-shirts or gray sweatshirts. And they just had holes poked out for their eyes so they could see.
Meillionaire tries to report the emergency, but he is attacked by one of the rioters.
And I don't know if he was trying to hit me or just the telephone out of my hand. He knocked the phone out of my hand that went across the room.
Prison employees are facing their worst nightmare. Although they are well aware of the risks, they never thought it would happen to them.
But we did realize there was a threat, but I guess you think you can control it. When you work with inmates, you get used to them, and sometimes you forget who they really are.
The guards and factory workers are helpless. Unarmed and outnumbered, they face rioters carrying homemade weapons. The staff member notifies Warden Petrovsky of the crisis.
Inside the wall, nobody carried weapons. The inmates always vastly outnumbered the staff. So if we had weapons in there, we could lose those weapons. The only weapons that we had was weapons in the tower.
Petrovsky alerts the FBI and the prison's regional director.
I try to give him an assessment of exactly what transpired and brought him up to date.
As fire spreads throughout the industries building, the detainees force the guards and employees into a tool cage and lock the door.
We kind of thought that unless there was some miracle, that we would probably just burn up, because there's no way to get out of one of the cages.
The riot spreads throughout the entire penitentiary complex. Enraged detainees capture guards, taking keys as they take hostages. They begin to release the regular prison population from their cells. The riot is beyond containment. The detainees now control most of the central buildings. Rioters attempt to gain access to the main cell block, but guards lock down the sally port just in time. As flames and smoke engulf the massive prison complex, nearly 100 guards and employees are trapped inside. Built at the turn of the century, the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary is the largest penitentiary in the United States.
It was a fortress inside that was surrounded by a wall. It raised from the ground approximately 40 feet, and the width on the top of the wall was approximately 3 yards wide. So it was a massive, massive wall.
Show me what you got.
The penitentiary is built on 300 acres of land, with 28 acres of property inside the walls.
Okay, well, we've got guards.
Warden Petrovsky needs to figure out exactly where his people are located inside the complex.
We had staff members in 11 towers that had very good observation over the entire outside compound, who logged those employees that they recognized in those areas. We started a list of the officers that we thought were hostages.
Ted Meillionaire and his colleagues are trapped inside an equipment cage in the burning industries building. Several rioters try to convince the Cuban detainees guarding the cage to unlock the door.
They were trying to talk the guard into opening the door because they wanted to get us out and kill us or do whatever. So the guard had to tell them that they couldn't open the door, and occasionally they would push one off for getting a little wrestle.
But the raging fire threatens to destroy the building. So the rioters are forced to move their hostages to another part of the prison complex. The only route takes them across the yard in clear view of the towers. A tower guard spots what he believes are detainees threatening prison employees.
There was a guy that was up ahead of me, and he got hit. I remember seeing him. He was a Cuban. He got hit right behind the ear.
One of the hostage takers is killed, and 5 others are wounded.
I was getting worried because the bullets were going pretty close around where we were.
Chaos reigns as guards and detainees run for cover.
They ran us across to the corner of the building where they couldn't shoot at us. And that time they took us in the chapel.
Detainees force their hostages into a small room and lock them inside. Less than an hour after the riots begin, FBI agents from the Atlanta field office arrive at the penitentiary. The FBI has jurisdiction over criminal matters in all federal prisons. Warden Petrovsky briefs Weldon Kennedy, the special agent in charge.
The first thing that I wanted to accomplish was to find out how many hostages had been taken, how many might be injured, what was the threat to those people who were in fact taken hostage. All of these people were like on an emotional high. I mean, they'd been prisoners for literally 8-10 years. Some of them serving life sentences, and now they're free to roam around the prison. It was like a holiday.
This is the area where they...
Agent Leon Blakeney heads the Atlanta FBI SWAT team. Agent Blakeney appears in silhouette to protect his identity.
Nobody really knew what area that the inmates controlled, and they really didn't know how many hostages were taken.
You had 2,500 people housed in that institution.
Here's the administration.
There were people running around all over the place, and quite frankly, it was chaos.
Chaos that had already turned deadly. As agents Kennedy and Blakeney develop their plan to retake the prison, they receive critical intelligence from 2 sources. From FBI agents posted outside the walls of the prison complex, and from prisoners inside the walls who don't want any part of the riot.
We began to learn who the hostages might be, where the detainees were holding up, how many were there, what kind of weapons they might have.
The detainees have taken the guards' radios, compromising prison communications. Agents and guards switch to a secure frequency.
2 white males and 2 black males.
The situation is grim. Negotiations will be critical to resolving the standoff. Special Agent D. Rosario, an FBI negotiator, opens up a dialogue with the rioters.
Unreasonable demands are being made. The hostage takers want things done now. And that's why it is so important to try to bring them down to a level where they can be reasonable. Can you negotiate with people at that very high emotional level? Generally speaking, no. So we had to give it time.
The rioters are emotionally charged, angry over the shooting death of a detainee.
This theme came up time and again. You killed one of ours. You had no reason to, and you killed him. And they wanted me to see the bodies, so I had the body brought out to where we were. I looked at the body. They wanted me to get emotionally involved with them. And these 4 that originally came out to talk to me really were only speaking for themselves. They were not speaking on behalf of the 1,400 that were in there.
In the command post, Warden Petrovsky receives a frantic call from 16 employees who have barricaded themselves in cell block E. E block is home to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary's most dangerous criminals.
These particular group of inmates were locked away in E to keep them from harming someone.
If the detainees get into cell block E and free the inmates, the lives of all 16 employees will be in danger. The E cell block is also home to the prison system's most notorious inmate, Thomas Silverstein.
A number of people in the Bureau of Prisons told me that he singularly was the toughest prisoner they believed that the Bureau of Prisons had ever housed or had in their custody. He was just an absolute animal, and he hated everything to do with the Bureau of Prisons or any of their staff.
Silverstein was incarcerated in 1975 for a bank robbery. Years later, he was sentenced to multiple life terms for fatally stabbing an inmate and a prison guard.
Thomas Silverstein was cold and he was a killer. He had two things on his mind: to escape from jail because his crimes were such where he was going to die in jail. And the other objective was to kill people. It was as simple as that.
The guards in cell block E are in grave danger. Special Agent Kennedy works with the FBI SWAT team to come up with a plan to rescue them.
The SWAT analysis was that they believed that they could go over the wall out of view of the rioting detainees and retrieve those people out of that building successfully.
The SWAT team will need ladders to get over the 40-foot-high wall. Special Agent Blakeney calls on the Atlanta Fire Department and a National Guard helicopter crew to help carry out the plan.
We put a helicopter up on the opposite side of the prison to attract their attention and at least have some diversion.
Chief, here's the situation. We've got a hostage crisis.
7 hours after the riot began, the FBI SWAT team launches a daring mission to rescue 16 prison employees without endangering the lives of nearly 100 hostages.
Listen, we need to put a truck up on the southwest corner with the ladder up. Everybody got it?
7 hours after a riot breaks out at Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, an FBI SWAT team launches a mission to rescue 16 employees barricaded in one of the prison's cell blocks. FBI Special Agent Weldon Kennedy knows that if the rescue attempt is seen by rioting Cuban detainees, it could spell disaster.
They would not hesitate to kill hostages if it became apparent to them that we were going to try to retake the prison or retake any part of it.
After scaling the wall, the FBI SWAT team approaches cell block E, home to the prison's most dangerous inmates.
Guard, come out, guard! Guard, out!
SWAT rushes the prison employees out of the building.
Keep your head down. Identify yourself when you get down there.
Across the prison yard, 27 employees, afraid for their safety, have barricaded themselves inside the prison hospital. Frustrated, they watch as their colleagues are escorted to safety. FBI SWAT team leader Leon Blakeney.
You know, they're screaming, frantic, you know, come and get us, come and get us.
The director of the Bureau of Prisons urges the FBI SWAT team to go back for the hospital employees.
The SWAT personnel informed me that there was a 100% probability that they would be detected going over the wall to try to effect a rescue of the hospital people.
We can't protect the other hostages that are being held in other parts of the prison. And my concern was if in fact we were observed, then they would start killing the other employees.
Blakeney wants to rescue the hospital staff, but knows it's a risk he cannot afford. The detainees break into cell block E and release the inmates. Vicious criminals run free, including Thomas Silverstein, a ruthless killer. As darkness falls, 3 buildings have been consumed by fire. Nearly 100 guards and employees have been taken hostage or have barricaded themselves inside the prison. Prison employee Ted Manier is being held inside a room in the prison's chapel.
So a man came up to the window, and he wasn't a Cuban. And the guy beside me said, "That's Silverstein." And he came inside, and he had a flashlight, and he started shining his flashlight. He shined the light on me, said, "Don't I know you?" And I told him, "No." I said, "I've never seen you before." And he said, "You don't know who I am?" He looked worse than anything I've ever seen in any type of movie or anything. And when you look at him, you know he isn't a normal. There's something strange about him. He's really scary.
Detainees finally distract Silverstein and he leaves without harming the hostages. On day 2 of the standoff, FBI Tactical Commander Danny Colson arrives at the prison.
You could hear this huge roar. It was like a million bumblebees. You could almost feel the energy of those rioting prisoners.
Colson started the FBI's hostage rescue team, an elite counterterrorism group in 1982. The HRT is law enforcement's equivalent to the Navy SEALs of the Army's Delta Force.
The only unit in the United States that has a sophisticated explosive or thermal breaching capability is the FBI's hostage rescue team.
But the HRT is already tied up, handling the riot at Oakdale.
So I was going to a very difficult tactical assignment without the team I was used to commanding.
Despite not having the hostage rescue team available to him, Colson must still develop a full-scale tactical rescue plan. He faces several obstacles.
A prison is built to keep bad guys in. You have barred doors, you have steel gates. Well, these same type of things keep a rescue force from getting in. I needed help from the military, primarily from the Delta Force.
Delta Force is the Army's Special Operations Unit, but using them at the prison would be illegal.
A posse comitatus law was passed right after the Civil War, and that law prevents the military from being involved actively with their personnel in civil law enforcement.
Barring approval from the White House, the FBI must rely solely on civilian law enforcement. Weldon Kennedy assembles over 400 SWAT members at the prison.
We had SWAT teams from all around the country, Chicago, New York, as well as, of course, the immediate surrounding area.
We figured that based on the capability we had, we were probably maybe an hour away from getting in to rescue the hostages. We were all concerned that they started killing hostages. We were helpless to get in there. And that's one of the reasons that De Rosario and the other negotiators were working so hard to try to get somebody to talk to calm the situation down.
But the negotiations are not going well. None of the rioters De Rosario has spoken with has enough power to influence the detainees. The negotiators need a different approach.
We could be here for a very long time unless we come up with a group of people in there among the detainees that can speak basically for, if not all of them, for the majority.
Rosario asks prison employees which detainees command the most respect.
Files of these people were opened to us, and we looked at several of them, and we decided on 5 or 6 men. We went to the grading and called them by name, and they came to the grading, and we invited them to come over to our side and sit down at a table with us and talk with us.
The detainees agree to talk with negotiators.
And we began our first serious conversations in terms of how can we resolve this? What is it that you're looking for? The number one demand that they had was that ultimately the Immigration and Naturalization Service conduct individual hearings for each and every one of them to remain in the United States.
It's a straightforward request. Rosario agrees to pass it on to the Department of Justice. As the meeting ends, the negotiator uses a bit of psychology to help solidify the group's standing as leaders within the prison.
We decided to give these men the mail that had accumulated since before the riot began.
In the penitentiary, daily mail is an important link to the outside world.
They went back in there, and we could literally hear the shouting of glee when these guys showed up with 2 bags full of mail. We believe it created in the minds of the others that these guys could get things done for them. And that's where it began. After that, we kept asking for the same men.
Rosario is beginning to make progress, but negotiations go slowly. In the prison hospital, 27 trapped employees are out of time. Detainees are trying to break down the door of the hospital with a battering ram. The employees call Warden Petrovsky in the command center. Warden Petrovsky relays the information to Weldon Kennedy. Detainees could break through the hospital doors at any moment.
We had 27 people in there, and there was concern that once the hospital was taken over, they might be injured or even killed. So the ram is going, we can hear it as a matter of fact, banging the metal doors of the prison.
Bureau of Prison officials worry about what could happen if detainees get access to the drugs and narcotics stored in the hospital.
What about right here?
Weldon Kennedy asks HRT Commander Danny Colson for a second assessment.
I said, yeah, we can get them out. We can go over the wall. We can defend the area with the perimeter and slide them out over the walls, and we're out of there.
Colson's biggest concern is that the detainees are watching news coverage of the riots.
Inmates were watching TV to see what we were doing as much as they could. And they could very well believe that a rescue of the entire prison was underway, and then they could start executing the hostages.
Hospital workers are moments away from becoming hostages, or worse.
So here we have a huge dilemma. Do we go in and take those people out of the hospital and save them, or do we let them be taken hostage?
Kennedy decides a rescue is too risky.
My decision was based on all the information that I had. We will not go for the rescue. I will not authorize the rescue.
And when he went back in and announced it to the Bureau of Prisons, I remember one Bureau of Prisons official storming past me and looking at me and said, if those are FBI agents, you'd go get them. And I said, no, he wouldn't.
Weldon Kennedy wonders if he has just signed a death warrant for 27 innocent people. For 2 days, a riot rages at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. Dozens of Cuban detainees now control the prison. 27 Bureau of Prison employees are trapped in the prison hospital. Weldon Kennedy, special agent in charge of the FBI's Atlanta field office, makes a tough decision.
If we entered the penitentiary, if we tried to retake it, there was a threat they were going to immediately kill them all.
Kennedy decides not to launch a rescue mission. 2 hours after the decision, communication is lost with the employees in the prison hospital.
It's the warden. Pick up if you hear me.
I knew that if anything happened to any one of those 27 people, that I would forever live with that as being the person responsible.
Guards stationed at the prison towers gather intelligence as detainees move hostages across the prison yard. One guard calls the FBI command post with a disturbing development. A group of detainees is dragging acetylene tanks into a basement where they can access the prison's utility tunnels. Danny Colson is the FBI's tactical commander at the scene.
They might be able to bring those tanks, get enough of them underneath our command post where the tunnels ran and cause an explosion, which would have decimated the command post and maybe allowed them to escape.
Colson and the FBI SWAT team prepare to go down into the tunnels.
The tunnels were designed for two purposes. One is all the utilities went through the tunnels, the steam pipes, the electrical pipes, and they were big tunnels. There were also ventilation tunnels that started big enough for a man to walk in standing up and ended up only a few inches high.
Colson and SWAT team leader Leon Blakeney have no idea what they will encounter once they are inside. Prison maps aren't reliable, and communication with agents above ground is not possible. As the team makes their way through the underground maze of pipes, they encounter a group of detainees. Leon Blakeney.
Once we got in the tunnels, we discovered then that in fact the Cubans were in there.
And oftentimes we'd come in very close proximity to them, within 10 feet of them. There would be a bunch of them and we'd confront them, and fortunately every time they'd turn around and run.
The SWAT team is unable to find the acetylene tanks in the vast underground system, but they are convinced the detainees are exploring the tunnels for a possible escape route.
We decided that the tunnel system was a real threat to the successful resolution of the crisis.
Ultimately, we were able to station SWAT teams down there. The Chicago SWAT team handled one part of the tunnel system, and the Washington Field Office SWAT team handled another part of the tunnel system.
On day 3 of the standoff, Danny Colson receives intelligence from agents with high-powered binoculars positioned around the prison. The detainees have moved nearly all the hostages to a building known as the American Dorm. Colson begins to formulate a tactical rescue plan.
What do you think what can...
Outside the prison, crowds gather. Families of the hostages, the prison guards, and even the detainees wait for information about their loved ones. The media covers breaking news from the penitentiary.
There was hundreds of media people there. There were networks, there was local TV. They established a tent city right across the street from the prison.
A single reporter and a simple error threatened to bring the standoff to a violent end. Special Agent D. Rosario.
The New York SWAT team was coming off shift, and the Chicago SWAT team was coming on shift, and they passed each other right at the steps of the administration building. And it looked impressive because there was two very large groups of armed men, all dressed in black.
A local reporter in Atlanta is watching this and sees these 40 or 50 men dressed in SWAT gear going up the front steps, and jumps to the conclusion and says so on live TV that, well, there they go. Looks like the FBI is going to retake control of the prison.
When the detainees see the media report, they take immediate action.
They brought several hostages out to the yard. And for the benefit of our cameras, so we could see them, they brought these hostages out and they poured gasoline over them. And then they took their cigarette lighters out and began clicking whilst literally screaming at us, "If you want to assault us, go ahead. As soon as you do, we're setting fire to these men."
Without knowing it, a young journalist may have just made a mistake that could cost the lives of nearly 100 innocent people. At the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, FBI agents negotiate with Cuban detainees who have taken over the prison. The lives of nearly 100 hostages hang in the balance. On day 3 of the standoff, a journalist's error ignites a crisis. FBI Tactical Commander Danny Colson.
All along, our negotiators have been telling the Cubans that we weren't coming in, that we wanted to negotiate and wanted them to surrender, and now a reporter is saying we're coming in.
The erroneous media report makes Special Agent D. Rosario's job even tougher as he negotiates for the lives of the hostages.
We had brought them down to such a reasonable level of emotion, and when they thought that the FBI was about to assault, they literally lost it.
We came literally within a few heartbeats of losing the hostages right then and there.
We sent everybody to what we call phase line green, which is the last position you are in before you do a rescue. It was like a spark that was about to ignite this terrible inferno of energy we had built up there.
I had to convince them that no such assault was going to take place, and that, you know, if things were going so well and so positive, why would we even think about assaulting them?
After 3 tense hours, the rioters agree to continue negotiations and spare the hostages.
We're just lucky that our negotiators were able to calm them down and we didn't have any loss of life.
For Colson, the close call is a warning sign that the standoff could explode into a full-scale riot with very little provocation. At the end of day 3, he obtains presidential approval to deploy Delta Force in a civilian crisis. The Special Operations Team arrives in Atlanta disguised as FBI agents.
There were 3 things that I desperately needed from them. The first was their breaching capability. They had all the breaching capability that would be necessary to get back into that prison to do a dynamic rescue. They had the ability to use explosives to blow steel doors down or blow locks out. They had the ability to use thermal devices to cut in an instant through steel and cable. The second thing I wanted was their sniper capability. When we went into that prison, if we had to go in, I wanted the very best snipers I could find doing cover for my men as they went in. The other thing is they have tremendous medical capability.
They travel with a complete hospital. They set up with the doctors, nurses, emergency equipment, the latest state-of-the-art everything.
If Delta Force or FBI teams engage the detainees in combat, the military hospital is prepared to treat any injury.
They can bring their doctors right in with us. They can pop a chest and do open heart surgery right there in the premises if necessary.
For the next several days, Delta Force snipers keep the detainees under constant surveillance. The rioters are working 24 hours a day, making weapons by the thousands.
There's all kinds of steel inside the prison, and they were very resourceful with the equipment. They ground weapons into spears. Each one of them must have had at least 2 weapons.
Delta Force sets up surveillance cameras all over the complex to track the movement of the detainees. Agents look for ways to get closer to the areas where the hostages are being held. If the Cuban detainees decide to kill the hostages, the tactical team must be able to launch an assault on a moment's notice.
We've got 2 people guarding the American dorm.
This is not something where you play a video game and after it's over, you hit your reset button and everybody's alive again. You're talking about the lives of human beings here, and you have a tremendous responsibility to try to get those people out.
Colson and Blakeney go back into the tunnels underneath the prison. One of the tunnels leads to the prison's electrical room. It's located right outside the American dorm, where most of the hostages are held.
We were literally on the other side of the window from inmates that were right across the walkway from where the hostages were being held. By doing that, we moved our response time from half an hour to 10 seconds. It was a tremendous leap in our capability at that point.
With the FBI SWAT teams and Delta Force in place, they will be in a better position to protect the hostages if negotiations break down.
Until they start harming a hostage, there's no reason for us to try to gain forcible entry to save these people. We therefore will wait as long as it takes.
The rioters have enough food to survive for up to a year. The day after Thanksgiving, they erect a Christmas tree on the roof of the building.
That was very disheartening to us. Maybe they didn't intend it psychologically to be that way. We interpret it as, we are going to be here through Christmas.
On day 8 of the crisis, prison guards stationed in the tunnel hear the sound of a drill. One guard recognizes the voice of Thomas Silverstein, the most vicious inmate in the federal prison system. They think Silverstein is searching for a way out.
We knew he would absolutely kill a hostage if it would help him escape.
Weldon Kennedy asks Danny Colson to go back into the tunnels to apprehend Silverstein.
So we walked down the tunnel and we did a tactical formation going down the tunnel. We had lights on our weapons. Suddenly we noticed there was water on the floor, and then the water started getting deeper, and it was over the tops of our shoes, and then over our ankles and up to our knees. Then what we finally realized is that that tunnel was actually flooded.
The water flooding the tunnels had been dumped by National Guard helicopters to fight the fires. Looking further into the tunnel, he can see water fills it to the ceiling. He knows there is no way Thomas Silverstein can be in there.
And what they were hearing was there were tubes, ventilation tubes, that were above the water line. So the guards were actually hearing his voice, but we knew he wasn't going to get out.
Still, Colson knows that Silverstein is as dangerous inside the prison as he is on the outside.
He was a sociopath, and he'd proven he would commit murder. So had he done that, had he attempted to harm a guard or anybody else in there, it would have caused us to have to go in and launch a rescue we didn't want to have to launch. And then again, we were faced with significant loss of life.
Knowing Thomas Silverstein is such a dangerous wild card, FBI negotiator D. Rosario must convince the detainees to turn him over.
United States, okay?
I emphasized and kept re-emphasizing the fact that Tommy Silverstein could become a very grave liability to the Cuban detainees and to their cause and to what they were trying to attain. I was told that they would think about it.
Rosario tells the rioters that until Silverstein is back behind bars, the hostages are in grave danger. As long as the vicious killer roams free, the standoff could come to a sudden and violent end. More than a week into the intense standoff with Cuban detainees at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, FBI negotiators worry that a dangerous American prisoner could jeopardize a peaceful end to the conflict.
What I suggested to them was that at some point or another, it would be in your best interest to turn Tommy Silverstein over to us.
Special Agent D. Rosario tries to convince the rioters that Silverstein is a serious threat to prison employees who are being held hostage. The American inmate is jeopardizing their position in the negotiations. A short time later, a large group of detainees appears at the Sallyport gate of the main cell block.
And there was about 100 Cubans screaming, waving their sabers in the air. And I could see they had Silverstein. And in the midst of all these screaming Cubans, they literally threw Silverstein at us.
Detainees tell agents how they captured Silverstein.
So they gained access to the pharmacy. They took some narcotic. They put it in a can of fruit cocktail, which he was known to like, and fed him fruit cocktail laced liberally with this drug, which in effect knocked him out.
The FBI viewed Silverstein's capture as an act of good faith.
That told us a lot. They don't want to hurt the hostages.
It showed the negotiators that these Cubans were responsible. They were willing to do things to cooperate with us in order to reach a common goal, which is a great step in any negotiation process.
On December 1st, a separate riot at Louisiana's Oakdale Penitentiary is resolved. The Cuban detainees incarcerated at Oakdale agree to release their hostages if the INS will review their cases.
The government of the United States, through the voice of the Attorney General, told them, you know, it's not unreasonable to give you a hearing.
D. Rosario offers the Atlanta detainees the same deal. The hostage takers have gotten exactly what they want, but still, negotiations stall. Audio surveillance reveals the rioters think the FBI will not use deadly force to remove them from the prison, that they would have a fighting chance to overpower federal forces.
The Cubans thought that the FBI and the other assets would come in with nightsticks and batons and just duke it out.
The next day, Colson decides to send the hostage takers an indelible message. The detainee agrees to talk with Colson.
And he said, I need to go to the restroom. So I said, wait right here. So I went around the barrier and I got the Marshall's SOG team and the New York City SWAT team. I got them all up and I said, put on all your gear and line up along the walls and look mean. And he walked around that barricade, and when he walked down that corridor, he literally jumped off the ground. I said, this is not gonna be a nightstick duel with your swords. We're gonna use deadly force.
The rioters agree to the terms of the surrender. On day 12 of the standoff, the Cuban detainees release their hostages.
I will never, ever forget those guys coming through that sally port and walking right by me, and the look of relief. They were haggard and they were tired and they were worn out, but this great sense of relief, and they were all smiling ear to ear.
When we finally walked out with hostages, not one of them having been harmed in any way, we regarded that as a huge success.
After 12 intense days, the Atlanta prison riot is over.
One of the most important things, it sort of focused the American public on the plight of the Cubans. And I think that was important. They did have a story to tell. They just told it in the wrong way.
After the riots, all detainees are granted an INS hearing. Some are released. Others with criminal records or mental disabilities are repatriated back to Cuba. The rest remain in prison. "13-year-old Amy McNeil had her whole life ahead of her. But when she was kidnapped on her way to school, her future was imperiled. The first call her terrified parents made was to the FBI. They hoped that the combined experience of agents and local law enforcement would flesh out the kidnappers before they took her life.
Wealth has its rewards, but it also brings its dangers. Kidnapping is one of them. No ordeal is more horrifying for a family than to have a child taken. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Kidnapping cases are among the most challenging for law enforcement, who often must remain out of sight, yet close at hand, ready to move in at a moment's notice.
About 20 miles south of Fort Worth, Texas, lies Alvarado, a small town in rural Johnson County. A few wealthy residents found Alvarado a safe haven away from the state's urban centers. The McNeils were among them. They lived as one of the area's most prominent families, partly from the return that Mr. McNeil made by selling an early design of the handheld calculator. At 7:15 a.m. on Friday, January 11th, 1985, they began their day having breakfast together, as was their usual routine.
Amy!
Afterwards, their teenage son would drive himself and his 13-year-old sister, Amy, to school.
Darling. Please be careful out there today.
Come on, come on, come on. Bye, Amy.
On the way, Amy and her brothers stopped to pick up their cousin as well. He and his family lived in a separate house on the McNeil estate. At about 7:45, they were finally on their way to class. Then, from behind an abandoned truck, a sedan pulled out across the road, forcing the teenagers' Jeep off to the side. A gunman jumped out of the car and approached the Jeep. He demanded that Amy get into the sedan. The blonde-haired man warned her brother not to contact the authorities. He would call the family in a short while with his demands. Instinctively, the teenager started to get out to help his sister.
Leave and go home, boy!
But the kidnappers threatened to kill him and his sister if he tried to follow them. As they raced off with the 13-year-old, the teenagers couldn't make out the license plate. In a matter of seconds, the girl was gone. They turned around and sped home. The boys told the McNeils what had happened and repeated the kidnappers' warning not to contact the authorities.
They pulled us over and they had guns. And then if you told the police that they kill her.
Mr. McNeil ignored the demand and called the FBI field office in nearby Fort Worth.
Give me the FBI.
Former FBI Special Agent Clint Brown, a 30-year veteran, understood that when a kidnapping occurs, every second counts.
Hello, this is Clint Brown. I worked many kidnapping cases, and in not a single case did the subject get away with it. The number one goal in all cases like this is the safe return of the victim. All activities, all actions are all geared toward not doing anything to endanger the safety of the person who's been kidnapped.
The FBI's first task was to set up a recorder on the family's phone. By capturing the kidnapper's voice, they hoped to identify him or the place he was calling from. The FBI also informed the local phone company to be prepared to trace any incoming calls. Agents instructed the father on how to handle the call. He needed to insist on proof from the kidnappers that his daughter was still alive.
Expect a call to come in today. So you probably want to look for a
The fact that they had worn no disguises disturbed former Johnson County Sheriff Eddie Boggs, who called in the Texas Rangers moments after he arrived.
The kidnappers hadn't tried to conceal who they were at all. They just, as we call it, they just barefaced them, just no mask, no disguises, anything. That means there's not going to be a victim around to tell who they are and what they look like. They're going to kill them.
Uncovering the kidnappers' identities might prevent that. Using an identikit that included hundreds of facial features, investigators worked with Amy's brother and cousin, building a composite of the man who held the shotgun. The teenagers had never seen the man with the stringy blonde hair before. They also provided a description of the kidnapper's car.
It seems like the people who engage in this are people of questionable and limited mental capacity, and very often they have, I guess what you might say, delusions based on drug use. Very often, you know, the need to get money to promote their drug habits or what drives them, and so we have that being a motive for the kidnappings very much, and that certainly impairs their ability to think or plan or pull this off successfully.
At 10 a.m., over 2 hours after Amy had been abducted, the phone finally rang.
Hello?
It was one of her kidnappers.
Yeah.
Did your son tell you I had your daughter?
The man demanded a $100,000 ransom.
Yeah.
Half was to be in $100 bills, the other half in smaller denominations. None of it could be sequenced. As instructed, Amy's father pleaded to speak to his daughter, but the kidnapper refused. Her captor insisted Amy was still alive and that her father could speak to her. When the man called back to say where to drop the ransom, he added that if the family called the FBI, they would never see Amy again. The call lasted less than a minute, not long enough to establish a trace for the technology of 1985. Agents played back the recording, listening for any background noise that might reveal the location. They figured the call was likely made from a payphone since they could hear wind and traffic noise. But they heard nothing more specific.
Yes, sir.
And no one in the family recognized the kidnapper's voice. Though Amy's family was wealthy, her father did not have $100,000 in cash available since most of his assets were tied up in investments. He called his associates to fly in on chartered planes with whatever cash they were able to withdraw. The next call they received was not the one retired Sheriff Eddie Boggs had hoped for. The press had learned of the kidnapping from one of McNeil's neighbors.
I got a call from my chief deputy, and he said that he has all sorts of media representatives out there wanting a story. They knew that there had been a kidnapping, there had been a ransom demand. They demanded to talk to somebody about the story and that they were going to go on the air with it.
If the kidnappers discovered that law enforcement was involved, they would likely dispose of Amy before the ransom was delivered. Investigators discussed what they should do next as precious minutes ticked by. The FBI instructed the family and the Johnson County Sheriff on how to proceed.
And the FBI said, well, here's what you do. You have your chief deputy call each one of the reporters in, ask him for his ID, ask him who is the very top man at his station that he can talk to, and then tell that top man, we're not going to confirm whether or not you have a story, but if you do have a story and you run it, you could possibly cost the life of a little girl.
Every local press agency agreed not to run the story until notified by the sheriff. Just before 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rang again.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm the guy who got your daughter.
It was the same man who had called earlier. On a separate line, an agent contacted the chief of security at the local phone company, who was standing by, hoping to trace the call.
Yeah.
He trapped the number
Yeah,
and began to
right
track
there.
its origin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mr. McNeil begged the kidnapper to let him hear his daughter's voice.
Calm down.
This time, the man allowed the frightened girl to speak to her father.
Daddy?
Her eyes concealed to prevent her from knowing where she was.
You haven't hurt me.
Be my girl.
He could hear her crying. Despite his own
calm down,
fear,
girl.
he reassured Amy that everything
down.
would be okay
No, Daddy, I'm
and that she
okay.
would soon be
You haven't
home.
hurt me.
That's when the man grabbed the phone.
We're having trouble finding the drop zone.
The kidnapper said that he had not yet secured a location for the ransom to be dropped.
What do you mean you're having trouble getting a drop zone?
Again, he promised to call back later.
Hello?
The room fell silent as former Texas Ranger Bill Gunn recalls.
It was very heartrending to listen to it. She was frightened, and of course Mr. McNeil was frightened. The conversation was very short. Mr. McNeil encouraged her to keep her upper lip up and remember who she was. And that was the end of the conversation.
They hoped the trace would be successful.
That's the hardest part, correct?
The security chief reported that the call had originated from outside the phone company's calling area. And since the call had been terminated, it would be impossible to trace it through the neighboring system. The phone company was able to determine that the call was made from somewhere in the town of Kennedale, 25 miles north of the McNeil's estate.
Good.
Amy was still in Texas, close to Fort Worth.
Kennedale? Okay, sounds like.
But without a specific location, investigators had little to go on.
You know she's in Texas. Yeah.
We had no idea, no evidence, no leads, nowhere to go. The only thing we had was the description of a car. I did have my troops, what few I had, to go out and start in a perimeter and expanding the perimeter, checking every farm, every house, every housing addition, everywhere they could for a car that matched the description that we had.
Johnson County deputies fanned out over a 30-mile radius from Alvarado up to Kennedale, searching for the kidnapper's car. They also alerted other local officers to be on the lookout for the four-door sedan. Yet without a license plate, it was not likely they'd locate the vehicle among the rural expanse. Almost 6 hours after 13-year-old Amy McNeil had been abducted, her father's friends from Texas and Arkansas had begun to arrive in Alvarado, carrying tens of thousands in cash. Texas Rangers escorted them from a small airport to a local bank where the currency would be processed before it was paid to the kidnappers. Wearing latex gloves, Rangers recorded and bundled the $100,000 ransom. They assembled half of it in $100 bills as the kidnapper had instructed. Another $50,000 was compiled from smaller denominations. Retired Texas Ranger Sergeant John Dendy helped direct the processing.
They had quite a time raising that amount of money on such short notice. But after they got the money, then the Rangers that were at the bank started to getting clean bags to put it in. In other words, no fingerprints, plastic bags, and made copies of the bills, so we'd have the serial numbers on each bill. Everything was loaded up, and then all we had to do then was sit and wait until more demands came in.
In the late afternoon, deputies had located a car that fit the description of the kidnapper's vehicle, parked 20 miles from the McNeil's estate. A license plate check revealed that the sedan had been stolen the day before from Mesquite, Texas, 50 miles east of Alvarado. Inside, deputies found no obvious signs of Amy or her abductors. They impounded the car and continued to canvass the area for witnesses who may have seen the driver. At the Johnson County Sheriff's Department, the FBI processed the sedan for forensic evidence. From the interior, they removed several sets of fingerprints. But without a suspect's prints to compare them to, the recovered prints could not help identify Amy's captors or their current whereabouts. By 11:30 p.m., 16 hours after Amy had been taken, her family had received 3 more phone calls, but still had not been told where the ransom was to be dropped. They hoped this would be the call that could secure Amy's release.
Hello?
It was the same man who had called earlier.
Yeah?
Once again, the phone company initiated a trace.
Yeah, I'm working on it right now.
Amy's father told the kidnapper that he had the $100,000 prepared as the man had requested.
No, I don't want to do this tomorrow.
But the caller said that it was too late. The ransom
the
drop he had in mind was at least 200 miles away from Alvarado.
Gas station.
No.
By the time Mr. McNeil reached the location, it would be light, too risky for the kidnapper to take a chance on being seen.
No, I don't.
The father pleaded to make the exchange tonight.
No, I can't wait till tomorrow.
The man refused. He said he'd call back tomorrow to make the arrangements.
We didn't think they would let us have her back alive, you know, in good shape. We had no idea what they'd done to her in this period of time that they'd had her.
Agents waited for word to see if the trace had been successful.
Yeah. No, it wasn't long enough.
It had not.
No. Couldn't get a trace.
Once again, the phone company had failed to secure the kidnapper's location.
All right, thanks.
Investigators could only hope that 13-year-old Amy McNeil would survive the night and eventually be reunited with her parents. By 5 p.m. on Saturday, January 12, 1985, a day and a half had passed since 13-year-old Amy McNeil had been kidnapped on her way to school in Alvarado, Texas. One of several unidentified kidnappers had called Amy's wealthy family 7 times. He demanded $100,000 in unsequenced currency, but had not told the McNeils where to drop the ransom. Though the kidnapper had also warned Amy's family not to call the FBI, Mr. McNeil had done so and was joined by several agents, a dozen Texas Rangers, and the Johnson County Sheriff's Department. Her abductors had promised to call again at 5 p.m. with the location of the ransom exchange and to confirm that Amy remained unharmed. Despite the agonizing wait, former Special Agent Clint Brown and his team wasted no time in preparing.
When the instructions were anticipated, a plan was devised to deliver the ransom money with Mr. McNeil driving the car and carrying the money himself for delivery, so that anybody would see the car. It was the limousine that he had. They would assume he was in the car by himself. Actually concealed in the car would be 2 FBI agents.
The agents also outfitted Mr. McNeil with a mini cassette device to record any conversations he may have with the kidnappers if they should approach his limousine. The interior of the car would be wired as well, and the 2 concealed agents would be heavily armed. At 5:10 p.m., the kidnapper called again. He told Mr. McNeil to drive 40 miles alone in his limousine from Alvarado on Interstate 30 to East Dallas and take exit 51. There he would find a gas station. The father was to be there by 7 p.m. in order to receive further instructions on the payphone by the vending machine. Mr. McNeil spoke to Amy briefly before her abductor disconnected. She was scared, but unharmed. The call was too brief to be traced. As planned, a contingent of FBI, Texas Rangers, and Johnson County personnel would follow McNeil's car at a distance. The team would be fully equipped, as retired Texas Ranger Bill Gunn remembers.
We got all of the assets available, tracking devices, aircraft. We had a tracking device on Mr. McNeil's car so that if we lost contact with it on the ground, both aircraft could receive it.
Amy's father promised his wife that he wouldn't come home without their daughter. He was fitted with body armor and provided with a sidearm in the event the kidnappers attacked him. The 2 agents with him would be armed with shotguns and semi-automatic pistols. They checked their radios to make sure they could be heard by the follow team.
You guys okay back there?
Check 1, check 2.
Retired FBI Special Agent Rod Kicklighter was assigned to ride in the limousine and advise the concerned father.
I recall one of our main instructions to him was not to let himself be taken hostage. And we talked through that quite a bit. He was to deliver the money, and we would then take over, try to effect the arrest, but he was in no way to get involved himself.
McNeil got the go-ahead to leave for the gas station in East Dallas, 40 miles away. When the limo had reached about a mile, the agent instructed the others to follow. Since the kidnapper had provided a specific route to the Dallas gas station, former Ranger Sergeant John Dendy and the others feared that the kidnappers could be surveilling the limousine as it traveled.
We had no idea where they would be, who they were, or what they were in, or anything about them. And in order for them not to become suspicious of any of us, we kept a good distance behind the car.
As the stretch crossed county lines, the Rangers radioed ahead to local authorities. They informed traffic patrols not to stop the speeding unmarked cars and provided license plates for their vehicles. Several units raced ahead to set up surveillance at the service station in East Dallas. While most maintained an outside perimeter, one team held a distant view of the payphone. They stood by, ready to act, in the event that the kidnappers revealed themselves or their 13-year-old hostage. Agents reported that the limousine had just reached exit 51. The phone had begun ringing at exactly 7 p.m. when Amy's father rolled into the service station.
What? Okay, hold on.
It was the 8th call he had received from his daughter's kidnappers over the past 34 hours. The man did not give the father the news he had hoped for. He told Mr. McNeil to take Interstate 20 east to Tyler, Texas, almost 100 miles from Dallas. At the US 69 exit, he would find another gas station, where he'd receive another call at 9:20 on the payphone outside. For retired Special Agent Clint Brown, it was difficult to predict what Amy's abductors might be planning.
We could tell the kidnappers were not very well organized. They seemed somewhat ill at ease, confused. Some of their plans seemed to change. They didn't seem to have a clear idea of where the money was to be delivered, and so they even appeared to be stalling at times, trying to formulate a workable plan that they thought they could use. So it did not appear that they had thought this out very well at all.
At the second gas station in Tyler, Amy's father was directed to drive to a third one in Longview, 40 miles further east, by 11 p.m. From there, he was ordered to drive 60 more miles north to a fourth gas station in Mount Pleasant, Texas. Precisely at midnight, he'd receive another call at the payphone outside. By now, investigators had covered over 180 miles, traveling for well over 5.5 hours. They hadn't anticipated the long trip, and 2 surveillance aircraft were forced to turn back to refuel in Dallas. Despite their frustrations, the team was determined to outlast the kidnappers.
We had no idea what they were going to do next. They just kept running us over East Texas. We saw a large portion of East Texas, and we didn't know when it was going to stop. But we knew that we were there for the duration.
But the situation was only getting worse. About halfway to the Mount Pleasant gas station, the limousine began losing power. After racing at speeds in excess of 100 miles an hour for extended periods, the engine simply quit. Agent Kicklighter feared that the mechanical problem would jeopardize any chance they may have still had to rescue the 13-year-old.
We're all getting a little tense and excited and worried that we're not going to get to the drop site and that we're not going to be able to get Amy back.
Dozens of miles away, at the gas station in Mount Pleasant, 2 camouflaged Texas Ranger snipers had been deployed to surveil the payphone. At midnight, it began to ring. Mr. McNeil was the only one who could answer. But he missed the call. At midnight on January 13th, 1985, just outside Mount Pleasant, Texas, 2 FBI agents and the wealthy father of a kidnapped 13-year-old girl worked frantically to repair a limousine's engine. Mr. McNeil's limousine was the car his daughter's kidnappers expected him to be driving alone to a Mount Pleasant gas station payphone by midnight. As Mr. McNeil tried to restart his car, 2 camouflaged Texas Ranger snipers, deployed to surveil the gas station, watched helplessly as the phone began ringing. Mr. McNeil was the only one who could answer, but he missed the call for the final location of the $100,000 ransom exchange. Patrolling the desolate roads around the gas station in Mount Pleasant, the support team was informed that Mr. McNeil had finally found his car's difficulty, according to former FBI Special Agent Clint Brown.
The car that Mr. McNeil was riding in began to develop electrical problems. Apparently, the alternator wasn't keeping the battery charged up, and so as time went on, the lights began to dim, and he began to have trouble with the electrical system of the car.
The communications and tracking devices wired to the limo system had drained its power over the past 7 hours. Disconnecting several instruments provided enough juice to get the engine started again. Though the headlights were inoperable, the car would move forward. Mr. McNeil and the 2 agents pressed on without full power and limited visibility. Their path was lit by an aircraft overhead. The remaining FBI agents, Texas Rangers, and Johnson County personnel gathered at a separate filling station a short distance from where the kidnappers had planned to call. They debated what to do next, since Mr. McNeil had missed the midnight appointment, and they had no way of contacting the kidnappers. With few options, investigators decided to send the limousine to the Mount Pleasant gas station late, figuring that the kidnappers would probably call again.
We were pretty well counting on the fact that they were going to show up or call, that they were desperate for the money. We reassured them we had the money, and we certainly reassured them we wanted Amy back. So we thought that they would stay connected to follow through with the payoff site.
At approximately 1 a.m., Mr. McNeil and the FBI agents arrived at the Mount Pleasant gas station in the troubled limousine. Almost 8 hours and 200 miles after they had first departed Alvarado, the limousine's engine gave out for good. The vehicle wasn't going anywhere without major repair. They could do nothing more but wait in the chilly night and pray that the kidnappers would contact them.
Due to the fact that we had to drive very slowly in the limousine, we were late getting to the drop site, approximately an hour. We were somewhat concerned about that, but we set up to wait by the drop site.
Texas Rangers kept watch, remaining hidden in the field across from the gas station. The fate of 13-year-old Amy McNeil remained unknown. Then, at 1:15 in the morning, the payphone started ringing. As investigators had suspected, one of the kidnappers called back, eager to get the ransom. He claimed that Amy was still alive, but refused to let her speak. Worst still, former Texas Ranger Bill Gunn and his team learned that the assailants had likely spotted the heavy presence of law enforcement on the desolate roads.
They started out telling him that he had brought the police with him, and they were very unhappy with that. So they finally told him to bring the money to a motel in Mount Pleasant. And at that time, he informed the man, the kidnapper, that he could not move the vehicle again. It was dead. And the man told him on the phone then, they said, well, we're coming after the money, and we've got plenty of guns, and there better not be any police officers around.
The father remained resolute, despite his fear of what the kidnappers may have already done to his daughter. He grabbed the ransom bag and stood outside so his daughter's captors could see him as they approached. Agents hidden in the limousine readied themselves for an armed confrontation. Retired Special Agent Kicklighter realized a mistake now could cost lives.
The exchange of a ransom during a kidnapping is always one of the most critical elements of the investigation. In this case, you don't want someone else to be hurt or taken hostage and be another victim of a kidnapping.
Hours passed in the cold January night. The Rangers stayed alert, protecting against an ambush. On the road circling the gas station, investigators saw no sign of vehicles approaching the ransom drop.
See anything out here?
By 3 in the morning, 2 hours after the kidnappers had called, it looked as if they weren't going to show. The Texas Rangers, Johnson County deputies, and the FBI considered what their next move should be.
It was decided that they were not going to come, and so the whole surveillance and monitoring situation was called off in anticipation we're going to have to start again the next day on Sunday.
Agents in the limo received word of the decision to regroup until daybreak. Mr. McNeil insisted they stay. But investigators convinced him that at present, there was nothing more they could do for his daughter.
Money, if nothing else, right?
Mr. McNeil was upset that yet another night was going to pass without a resolution to getting his daughter back. He had done everything that they had told him to do, so there was a great deal of disappointment.
A car came by to pick up McNeil and the agents. They headed back to the nearby gas station where others had begun to assemble. The two Rangers, hiding in the field for the past 3 hours, moved toward the street where the sheriff was to meet them in a separate van. As they approached, an unidentified vehicle cruised by their position. It was filled with a group of men and a young girl who headed towards the interstate.
Buick southbound.
The Rangers called for units.
Location. Need somebody to pick them up.
As they watched those believed to be the kidnappers speed off into the cold Texas night. At 3:45 a.m. on January 13th, 1985, 2 Texas Rangers believed they had spotted the kidnappers of 13-year-old Amy McNeil racing away from the ransom drop point in Mount Pleasant, Texas.
Copy me, command post, copy.
They alerted all available units in the area.
High rate of speed.
En route to collect the Rangers, the Johnson County Sheriff heard their call and saw the suspicious vehicle on the highway. He gave chase, but the sedan easily pulled away from the lumbering van that former Sheriff Eddie Boggs was driving.
My van being as slow as it was, they outran me like I was standing still. There wasn't any way I could keep up even within sight of what was going on, because that chase was going over 100 miles an hour, and it was unbelievable.
Despite his best efforts, the sheriff lost the car and returned to the makeshift command post to provide a detailed account.
Been having trouble reaching you on the radio.
Amy's life was now in even greater jeopardy since there was no question the kidnappers knew law enforcement was in the area. Then a call came in from their remaining aircraft. The pilot had spotted the vehicle, and investigators still on the road had resumed the chase. Former Texas Ranger Bill Gunn recalls that the suspects were speeding west on Interstate 30.
But at that time, the rest of us had gotten involved, and we were in pursuit of the vehicle. And we continued at a high-speed chase down Interstate 30, which would have been a direction going toward Dallas, and to a small community in another county.
10 minutes later, Texas Rangers, sheriff deputies, and the FBI fell into line. The suspects refused to slow down. As the lead ranger began to close in, he was fired upon. A shotgun and pistol pelted his car with rounds. As he prepared to return fire, he glimpsed two girls in the back seat. One was young Amy McNeil, who they were forcing into the back window.
The people who were responsible for this started firing guns at them out the back windows on each side of the Buick. They would push Amy up into the back glass where she could be seen, and of course we couldn't return any fire.
Construction narrowed the interstate to one lane, but the suspects did not slow. Shots hit the grill of the lead car. Slugs pierced the carburetor, forcing the Ranger to stop. The chase continued at high speeds through 3 Texas counties before the suspects exited into the small town of Saltillo, Texas.
Dispatch, looks like we're slowing down.
Unexpectedly, at about 4 a.m., they stopped on the front lawn of a home and several fled on foot. They opened fire on investigators. 2 gunmen barricaded themselves behind a van parked in the driveway, while a third disappeared behind the house. None of the officers on the scene were wearing body armor.
When I first got out of the car, I could see this man standing in front of the van. Now, this is Sunday morning at 4 o'clock, and no moon as far as I can remember. And every time he'd pull off around with that 12 gauge, he'd line up the world.
Investigators took cover behind their vehicles and pinned the gunman down. The suspect's abandoned car was in the direct line of fire. Amy was trapped inside without any means of escape. One assailant attempted to break into the home of an elderly resident. She took cover, not knowing what was happening a few feet from where she had slept. As the firefight raged on, investigators knew that they had to somehow get to Amy McNeil before it was too late. At 4 a.m. on January 13th, 1985, the FBI, Texas Rangers, and Johnson County sheriffs exchanged gunfire with the kidnappers of 13-year-old Amy McNeil. After being held for almost 2 days, Amy remained trapped inside her captor's vehicle with a female assailant on the front lawn of a farmhouse in Saltillo, Texas. Ranger Sergeant John Dendy was one of several who braved the hail of bullets.
I could see one of them behind the front wheel of the car, and that's what I was mainly shooting at. I didn't have any other place to go. And the only thing I knew to do is shut them down. And the only way I'm going to do that is to hit one of them.
Several miles away in another vehicle, Amy's wealthy father was accompanied by the Johnson County Sheriff and an FBI agent on their way to the scene. They could do nothing more but hope and pray that the 13-year-old would survive the battle.
Sheriff. Go ahead.
As the shooting continued, a Johnson County Sheriff's deputy moved towards the suspect's car, as Ranger Bill Gunn recalls.
One deputy sheriff ran from the vehicle that he arrived in over to the kidnapper's vehicle, and she asked him if he was a police officer, and he said, yes, ma'am, and she just really grabbed hold of him then and hung on.
The deputy handed the frightened girl to a ranger who took her out of harm's way. They ran back to the road where more backup arrived. After 44 hours in captivity, 13-year-old Amy McNeil was finally safe. The ranger needed to contact the other investigators and to tell her father the good news. Retired FBI Special Agent Rod Kicklighter was in the vehicle as the ranger's call came through.
It seemed like hours before we finally got the confirmation that Amy was safe. I recall Mr. McNeil beating me about the head and shoulders about Amy being safe and they've got her, and he was ecstatic, as were we all.
Hold your fire! Hold your fire!
While Amy was headed to meet her father, the shooting had subsided. The gunmen had both been wounded. Investigators held their weapons on them, not sure if the suspect still had ammunition. Then, out of the shadows, a third gunman emerged.
Freeze! Get in! Get on your knees! Get on your knees! Drop your weapon!
Realizing that escape was impossible, he surrendered. From inside the kidnapper's car, investigators cuffed the female suspect and a fourth man who had remained there during the shootout. Rangers confirmed with Amy that all the kidnappers were now in custody. On a deserted highway a mile away, Amy ran towards the waiting van that held Mr. McNeil.
Dad! Dad!
Former Special Agent Clint Brown watched the reunion between father and daughter.
Everybody was pretty emotional. You know, we all had kids and daughters and such, so we were pretty emotional just watching that reunion, and everyone was so happy that it had turned out so well that we all shared in that excitement and joy of her being recovered safely.
No one but the suspects had been hit by gunfire. Both were ex-convicts and high on methamphetamine at the time of the shooting. The elderly resident was also examined. She had survived the ordeal with only frayed nerves. A license plate check on the kidnapper's car revealed that it had been stolen in Dallas the day before. Investigators also figured out why the suspects had stopped their vehicle when they had.
We never could understand why they turned in at this particular house, but we found out later they'd run out of gasoline.
34-year-old James Foote, who had made the initial ransom calls, had previously worked for Mr. McNeil and had hatched the plan to kidnap Amy. For using a weapon in the commission of the crime, he was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and attempted murder and was sentenced to life in prison. 27-year-old Michael Mills, who had made the remaining calls, was likewise convicted of aggravated kidnapping and attempted murder, receiving life. The other assailants, 21-year-old Daniel Neckar Jr. and 21-year-old Thomas Barnes, were convicted of the same charges and also sentenced to life. The 18-year-old woman who was with them was charged as the men were. She had only met James Foote a few days earlier before the kidnapping had occurred. The woman was scared when the men brought the 13-year-old into the house, but stayed to prevent Amy from being abused by them. Amy later confirmed that the 18-year-old had protected her, according to retired Johnson County Sheriff Eddie Boggs.
She was only given a 10-year probated sentence per Amy's request. The female accomplice really didn't know what she was getting into at the time whenever she joined them, because this They had already been using dope for several days steady before she got involved in it. And it was just she got involved in something she couldn't get out of.
6 months later, on July 4th, 1985, Foote was transferred from the state penitentiary to the Johnson County Jail to face additional charges. Authorities had traced the weapons he used in the kidnapping to the armed home invasion of a Dallas man. Foote was also indicted in Arlington, where he had attempted to kidnap the child of a wealthy developer days before he took Amy. Outside, in the blistering Texas summer, the prison guard agreed to retrieve a water hose to cool down the inmates. When he left, Foote climbed over the 8-foot fence. He made it under the barbed wire. Seconds later, the kidnapper disappeared into the nearby woods. That evening, the Johnson County Sheriff faced the difficult task of informing Mr. McNeil that his daughter's kidnapper had escaped, to where no one knew. Deputies would be stationed outside the McNeil home as long as Foote remained at large, fearing that the convict might seek vengeance on the family. Mr. McNeil immediately offered a reward for any information leading to Foote's recapture. A few days later, a call came in to Sheriff Boggs that seemed promising.
James Foote had a cousin that lived up close to Paris, Texas, that called in and said that he knew where he was and had been in contact with him. And that cousin also had some criminal charges pending on him and was willing to make a deal.
Okay, guys, we're going to be entering.
Foote had been hiding in the cousin's Paris, Texas home, 170 miles northwest of the prison.
Gain access to the property.
Johnson County deputies prepared for the assault of the single-story dwelling.
Over here. This is your living room area.
They readied themselves for another armed confrontation. As promised, the cousin made certain that Foote was inside at home for the arrest to take place.
Deputy Sheriff, freeze! Get your hands up, it's your
This
hands.
time, there would be no shootout. Sheriff deputies captured Foote without incident. He was returned to prison, where Foote will spend the rest of his life. At the state capitol in Austin, Texas, retired Ranger Sergeant John Dendy was among those who received commendation and recognition for the successful conclusion to the case.
Going to Austin, talking to the governor, getting a commendation. The fact that I knew that I had had something to do with saving this beautiful little girl's life was worth more than anything else they could do. That made everything worthwhile. All the 36 years that I spent in law enforcement, that was the top.
Because law enforcement responded quickly and did not relent, Amy McNeil was reunited with her family and friends, thankful for the determined officers and agents who answered the call. As crack cocaine tore through Washington, D.C., a drug gang fought to take control.
What up? Man, papers at.
Authorities fought back with everything they had. But gang members used any means to avoid prosecution. As the violence raged out of control, law enforcement would take back the streets.
In the early 1990s, Washington, D.C. became the murder capital of the nation. Few were left untouched by gang violence, which was ignited by the drug trade. By 1994, that violence would strike at the very heart of law enforcement. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office, who would fall to the FBI to lead an international manhunt and bring in the leader of the city's most vicious gang.
October 26, 1994. The nation's capital was about to become the backdrop to another bloody crime. Just before midnight, 3 masked gunmen broke into a home in the northwest section of the city.
Get up! Get up! Get up! Now! Get up!
They targeted Gerald Gaither, demanding his cash and drugs.
Where's the money? Where's the money? Where's the money? Where's it at? Where's the money?
He turned over what little money he had in his pockets.
Get up!
The owner of the home, William Ragland, was accosted while working in his basement.
Where's the money at? Get out!
Upstairs, one of the gunmen discovered Nancy Hatchett and Darlene Hatchett, Ragland's daughter and granddaughter.
Get outstairs! Into the room! Go!
To convince Gaither to cooperate, the gunmen terrorized each of the residents.
Get out! Get out!
The women were ordered to lie face down on the floor.
Get out! Hands out! Tell us, come on, old man! Come on, old man! Tell us where the money is. Where is it? Where is it?
Gaither denied having more cash or drugs.
Put your hands down now!
One of the gunmen turned his .22 caliber handgun towards Ragland. The 89-year-old retired federal worker died instantly.
Tell us where it is! Play games.
Andre Madison, another resident, was hustled into the living room.
Shut up!
One of the 3 attackers noticed his gold necklace and ripped it from his neck.
Get down! Get out! Get out! Face down! Face down! Where's the money? Shut up! Shut up!
Though one man was dead, Gaither still refused to cooperate.
Get out! Get out! What are you doing?
Enraged, one of the gunmen began shooting the residents. The robbery attempt collapsed into murder. The trio quickly fled the house. One of the attackers vomited near the back door. Nancy Hatchett called 911. Officers from D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department quickly arrived at the house, located in a known drug area. Inside, 3 people were dead. William Ragland, his granddaughter Darlene Hatchett, and Gerald Gaither. Pictures were taken of each body, and shell casings were collected. Outside, police discovered vomit near the door.
Hey, how you doing?
Nancy Hatchett and Andre Madison, the only survivors, tried to help police develop suspects. But the attackers were masked, making identification difficult.
Okay.
For Metropolitan Homicide Detective Anthony Brigadini, a check on victim Gerald Gaither suggested a possible motive.
The main victim of the triple was a drug dealer in the First and Kennedy Street area. The guy drove flashy cars, had nice clothes, had a lot of money. When the drug dealer was unable to give them enough money and or drugs, things started to get a little harried, and that's when the shootings occurred inside.
Neighbors told police that after hearing gunshots, they saw a dark-colored sedan with a loud muffler leaving the area. An all-points bulletin was issued for the vehicle and 3 men inside. One hour after the murders, 2 D.C. cops spotted a noisy vehicle that fit the report. Noticing 3 men inside the vehicle, the officers pulled over the gray Oldsmobile. The police police asked the men for identification. The driver was identified as Benny Lee Lawson. The passengers were determined to be Kobe Mowat and Jermaine Graves. In one of their pants pockets, police recovered a broken gold necklace. But details from the murder scene were still incomplete. To the officers, the necklace was meaningless. After recording all of the men's names and addresses, the three were soon released. There was no evidence in the car to connect them to the murders. Despite the lack of solid suspects, homicide detectives believed that Gerald Gaither had been murdered by a rival drug gang. By 1990, crack cocaine had hit the streets of Washington, D.C. Neighborhood gangs began to emerge throughout the city when it became clear that there was a lot of money to be made from dealing the drug. As more and more money flowed to the gangs, they resorted to violence to protect their turf from rival drug dealers. By 1994, the nation's capital was averaging nearly 400 homicides a year. D.C. police joined forces with the FBI and several federal agencies to combat the drug-related violence. Most of the murders remained unsolved. Hoping to rattle free a lead in the triple murder, detectives began canvassing the neighborhood where the murders took place. Neighbors were too afraid to openly cooperate. Some were willing to phone in information anonymously. One tip led to Benny Lee Lawson, one of the three men pulled over the night of the homicides. Investigators learned that the gold necklace taken from Andre Madison matched the one officers found on one of the men in Lawson's car. Detective Brigadini questioned Lawson.
Lawson's interview lasted about 3 or 4 hours, and different detectives went in and spent some time with Lawson in an attempt to get him to provide some sort of information about his involvement in the triple murder.
Sit down. Look at me.
Lawson repeatedly denied having any knowledge of the triple murder and refused to take a polygraph test. Investigators tried to shake his story with the false threat that they could put him at the murder scene through a DNA test of the recovered vomit. Lawson remained unswayed. After 4 hours, police had no choice but to release him. Lawson's name was run through the crime database. He had been identified by police intelligence units as a member of one of D.C.'s most violent and feared street gangs. The 1st and Kennedy Street Crew, named after the city blocks the group lived on and controlled. Organized in 1988, the crew was involved in drug dealing, theft, kidnappings, drive-by shootings, and murder. The men with Benny Lawson the night of the murders, Kobe Mowat and Jermaine Graves, confronted him about the long hours he spent with the homicide detectives. They believed he had snitched and told the police about the gang's involvement in the triple murder. Lawson was infuriated by the accusation. He hated the police. He assured the two that he had revealed nothing to investigators. Since no arrests had been made, Graves was confident the cops had no evidence. Mowat was not as sure. He declared that he would leave the country rather than be indicted for murder. Lawson vowed he would never go back to prison where he once had been raped.
What they asked him.
Lawson returned home that night. Being labeled a snitch was an insult to his loyalty towards the crew. And for a gang member on the streets, it was a death sentence. He was committed to gaining back the respect of the crew, proving that he was not a snitch. 22nd, 1994, a few days before Thanksgiving, Benny Lawson returned to Metropolitan Police Department headquarters. It was around 3:15 p.m. He was trying to locate the homicide department he had visited several days earlier.
Hey.
He asked two teenagers for directions.
Yeah, we're going that way, through that door right there.
They mistakenly led him to the cold case squad.
Okay, well, we'll see you
The
then.
team inside the office was made up of personnel from the MPD and the FBI, whose job was to breathe life into the growing number of unsolved homicide investigations. Inside the office were FBI agents Martha Dixon Martinez, John Kufta, Mike Miller, and Metropolitan Police Sergeant Hank Daly.
At least I'm consistent.
The teenagers, who were there for a scheduled appointment, began to speak with the officers. With no warning, Lawson pulled out his M11 assault handgun and started firing. The headquarters of the Washington D.C. police was under attack. Repeated gunfire echoed through Washington D.C. police headquarters. Detectives raced to the third-floor office where the shooting continued. No one knew what was going on behind the locked doors of the cold case squad room.
Come on, open up the door! Open up the door!
Across town at the FBI's Washington field office,
Hey, Tony, what do you have? All right, I'll talk to you.
It was just a normal day like any other day, and we were monitoring one of the police radios, and we heard a call go out that there had been a shooting at MPD headquarters.
Okay, we're on our
agents
way.
quickly determined the shooting was taking place inside the cold case office, where several FBI agents were on duty.
And very quickly, we started to page our agents that were assigned to the cold case homicide squad to try to account for all of them. And as time progressed, we weren't hearing back from some of the agents, and we realized that we might have some agents inside there. And as we listened, the calls became more serious, and they were requesting assistance.
Critically wounded, Special Agent John Kufta was trapped inside the cold case squad office. When the shooting had stopped, he could hear the shouts from officers outside the office trying to get in. Help was just a few feet away.
At that point, I heard a voice tell me they couldn't get in, and I thought to myself, you know, I'm not going to die in here. I thought of, you know, my wife, my 8-month-old daughter at the time, and I knew that if I stayed awake, if I continued to breathe, if I continued to pray, and if they got me to a hospital, I'd be alive.
Shot in the thigh, arm, stomach, neck, and chest, Kufta managed to open the door. Detectives pulled him out. The only other visible person to the rescuers was Metropolitan Police Sergeant Hank Daly. Barely clinging to life, he was dragged from the room. He was rushed outside where a helicopter waited to transport him to the hospital. Not knowing if the shooter was planning another ambush, the officers waited for the SWAT team to arrive. FBI agents and SWAT teams from around the Capitol converged on the Metropolitan Police Headquarters. Yells continued from inside the room as the SWAT team arrived. Heavily armed, they entered the room. They first discovered FBI agent Mike Miller's body. His weapon was still in its holster. In an adjoining room, the SWAT team discovered the body of an unidentified black male. There was a gunshot wound on his hip and a fatal wound to his head. FBI agent Martha Dixon Martinez was the final victim found. She had gunshot wounds in her back. Near her lay the gun the shooter had likely used to kill her and the others, an M11 assault weapon. Shouts for help came from inside a closet.
Suspect in the closet, open the door slowly!
Not knowing if he was a suspect or an innocent bystander, the SWAT team apprehended one of the teens who had walked in the room before the shooting began. The other teenager had managed to flee the office earlier after being shot in the leg.
I don't even know the guy.
Supervisory Special Agent Mark Giuliano and other agents arrived at the scene.
I just remember walking through the hallway and just seeing the chaotic scene and the blood and just the total realm of emotions on everybody's face, from being focused on the mission of trying to figure out what happened and could there be other people involved.
Based on the crime scene analysis, investigators quickly reconstructed what had happened inside the room.
Getting all those shells over there?
Yes.
After Miller, Kufta, and Daly were ambushed, Agent Dixon Martinez joined the firefight. She was able to shoot the suspect in the hip before being shot in the arm, dropping her gun. The attacker took her 9mm handgun and shot the agent in the back as she tried to crawl for cover. He then put the gun to his own head and pulled the trigger. Police fingerprinted the shooter. Hopefully his identity would shed light on his actions. 2 FBI agents were dead. Sergeant Hank Daly would not survive his injuries. It would be the first time in 8 years that more than one FBI agent had been killed at a single time. It was also one of the worst attacks in history on the D.C. police. Agent Kufta would endure 7 major medical operations before recovering. The loss of his co-workers, Sergeant Hank Daly, Agents Mike Miller and Martha Dixon Martinez, was devastating.
Martha, Mike, and Hank were law enforcement heroes. They didn't as much lose their lives as gave their lives for a cause of justice, for a cause that they so deeply believed.
Within hours, the investigation was moving forward. The fingerprints of the shooter had come back.
When the information came up about the identity of the shooter, a detective had the information, came into a conference area where the majority of the homicide officials and detectives were, and it was announced that the shooter was Benny Lee Lawson Jr.
When homicide detective Anthony Brigadini heard the news, he realized his squad was the probable target of Lawson's rampage. Lawson and the 1st and Kennedy Street crew were the prime suspects in the triple murder of William Ragland, Darlene Hatchett, and Gerald Gaither. The shootings at headquarters showed just how far the gangs would go to protect themselves.
I think that law enforcement as a whole has learned that people operating gangs or crews are serious about what it is that they're doing. They won't stop at any cost to get their mission accomplished.
Now that federal officers had been murdered, the FBI was given jurisdiction in the investigation of the crew.
I was detailed to work jointly with the FBI to investigate the 1st and Kennedy Street crew, who at that time we felt were responsible for essentially Lawson's actions here at police headquarters.
After joining the task force, Brigadini shared what he knew about Benny Lawson and the crew. Special Agent John Kerr was on the team. For him, Benny Lawson's connection with the 1st and Kennedy Street crew raised serious questions.
Was this just a random act by Benny Lee Lawson, or were there accomplices? Did he have any help in this? Were there be any further attacks on agents and police? And so that was a reason that we opened up an investigation to answer those questions. Was this a conspiracy?
Investigators obtained a search warrant that night for the house Lawson had lived in.
Please get out! Please get out!
In his room, they uncovered a note written to the members of the D.C. homicide unit who had interrogated him, threatening to kill them.
All right there.
Gang-related materials, violent rap lyrics, and drawings of murders were everywhere. For investigators, the items in Lawson's room reflected a fixation with violence common to virtually all gang members.
It was very obvious and disturbing that these individuals were living this lifestyle. This is the lifestyle that they were a part of. This is the lifestyle that they identified with, and wanted this. They wanted to actually live the same lifestyle as the lyrics that they were writing, the pictures they were drawing, and the videos that they had.
As the victims of the shootings were laid to rest, investigators were planning their strategy to ensure that these gang members could never kill again. With 6 homicides on their hands, including 2 FBI agents and a Washington D.C. police detective, a joint FBI MPD task force began gathering information on the 1st and Kennedy Street crew. FBI agent Mark Giuliano headed up the task force.
And our goal was to, A, investigate the crew because they were a violent street gang, and B, to try to determine what the motivation was of Benny Lee Lawson to come into police headquarters and do what he did, and to determine if there was anybody else involved at either end, either in helping him get there to pull off what he did or helping the crew afterwards to cover up what had happened.
In the wake of the shootings at MPD headquarters, police pressure on gang members increased. The crew members reacted by spending less time on the streets. Building a case against them for their criminal activity would be difficult. The crew was impenetrable to outsiders. Planting an undercover agent inside the gang was too dangerous.
What we realized is that, A, we had a very close crew. That is, they took care of each other and watched each other very closely, but they were very, very leery of outsiders. They had been leery before, but they were even more leery now, and that any attempts for us to get somebody, an agent or a police officer on the inside, was not something that we were going to even attempt to do.
Instead, agents would have to gather intelligence on the crew through covert surveillance. As time went on, the gang returned to business as usual. The FBI was watching.
We had extensive surveillance coverage of the area, day and night, identifying everyone that came onto the block, identifying who the buyers were, what time of day, where did they go when they bought, did they get into a car, did they go into an alleyway, did they do it hand to hand right there in front of you. All these things we started to take notice of and document.
Through surveillance, the leaders of the crew were soon identified. Kobe Mowat and his second-in-command, Jermaine Graves, the 2 men in the car with Benny Lawson the night of the first triple homicide. On the streets, Mowat was known to be violent and unpredictable.
The reputation of Kobe Mowat was that of fear, that he would react quickly. At times he had a temper. He always carried a gun and could be extremely violent at times.
Looking into Kobe's past, investigators discovered he shared a common history with Graves and with Benny Lawson. Their relationship developed in 1990 while serving together in Washington, D.C.'s Lorton Prison, located in Northern Virginia. They had been arrested and convicted for weapons violations while preparing for a drive-by shooting in another gang.
Do you know what happened to me?
The task force members were convinced that Mowat and Graves played some role in all 6 murders. But the leaders of the 1st and Kennedy Street crew continued to keep a low profile. Agents devised a long-term strategy that would net not only Mowat and Graves, but also the entire gang membership. They would slowly build a conspiracy case against the crew that would include the entire range of their criminal activities, from crack cocaine trafficking to murder.
Off the street. Well, back in. 4:30. Hang on to those for me. And,
Agents would work themselves inside by first targeting individuals who regularly purchase their drugs from the crew. This would allow them to watch and record the gang committing crimes. And by arresting the buyers, agents would have leverage to turn them into informants.
We'd come into an area when we thought that they'd be the most active in selling drugs. And in order to identify someone and hopefully get lucky, catch someone with some drugs, and maybe force them to work for us at some point.
Some of the buyers arrested were unwilling to cooperate at first. The dangerous reputations of Mowat and Graves were well known. But the threat of long prison sentences was powerful. The FBI strategy paid off. Threatened with significant jail time, one of the biggest drug suppliers to the crew decided to become an informant. At the FBI's direction, he would generate conversation with crew members about their illegal activities.
And he'd have conversations with them, and they'd like to brag about what they've done. And at our direction, he would bring something up, say an old drive-by shooting or an old murder, or something about drug dealing. And these individuals would just start to talk about it. They'd talk about who was involved, what happened. All of this was being recorded.
Through the informant and the recordings, agents learned that Mowat, Graves, and Lawson had killed previously. Less than 3 weeks before breaking into William Ragland's house, they had kidnapped and murdered another rival drug dealer.
What up, boy? What up? Huh?
William Red Billy Woods was a well-known dealer from a rival gang. Jermaine Graves arranged to lure Woods to his mother's house. Once there, Mowat, Graves, and Lawson robbed him and beat him.
Get up, boy.
Fearing the rival gang would retaliate against the crew, they shot him 3 times and dumped his body in the road.
You can go down.
Agents also heard testimony from another informant that further implicated Mowat, Graves, and Lawson in the triple murder at William Ragland's house.
Down where? First and Kennedy? Huh?
He overheard Benny, Kobe, and Jermaine Graves talking about the triple homicide. And one of the things that he mentioned that they were giving Benny a hard time for was the fact that he threw up at the scene of the triple homicide. That's something that only the homicide detectives knew and that we knew and had not been released to the public.
The information was only circumstantial, but months of surveillance and informant testimony gave agents enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for the homes of Kobe Mowat and Jermaine Graves. They would strike at Jermaine Graves first. A heavily armed SWAT team made their way inside his house.
Please get down!
No one was there.
Oh, one more.
Agents would not leave empty-handed.
We were able to locate a 9mm gun, semi-automatic pistol, as well as some crack cocaine, what we believe to be crack cocaine. One of the members on the squad took the information that we got from the gun and put together an affidavit for an arrest warrant based on the fact that it was a convicted felon in possession of a firearm.
For several weeks, Graves eluded investigators. They continued surveillance, hoping that he would turn up.
We really didn't know where he was. We had some ideas. We knew he was still in the metro area, but obviously he knew once we hit his house that we were looking for him, and word was out on the street that we were looking for him, so he was keeping a very low profile. During one of our very standard surveillances, I saw an individual who walked like Jermaine Graves, just from the back. I couldn't see his face. So I asked one of the units to drive around the block and just take a look at the guy. And the next thing I know, they jumped out and arrested him. They knew as soon as they pulled around the corner it was him, and you know, he was arrested right on the street corner of 1st and Kennedy.
Just a few months after the first triple murder, Graves was off the streets. Making a case against Kobe Mowat would prove more difficult. With the arrest of gang member Jermaine Graves on a weapons charge, the FBI task force was one step closer to taking the 1st and Kennedy crew off of the Washington, D.C. streets. Now agents were ready to serve a search warrant on the home of the crew's leader, Kobe Mowat. A SWAT team entered the house Kobe shared with his twin brother Kareem. The two never knew what hit them. Investigators found gang-related documents, drawings, and writings, and a small amount of marijuana. They found no guns or evidence of the murders. But that was not their prime interest. The task force hunted for evidence of a larger crime pattern.
Gang videos, bad videos everywhere.
Most of the evidence we were looking for at the time was list of crew members, shirts that they all wore with the logo on them, pictures, phone books, things that would associate this group together.
The twins were arrested on drug charges and taken in for booking. Kobe's time in jail was brief. Only his brother Kareem's fingerprints were on the bag of pot. Kobe was released and the possession charge was dropped. Agents were determined to see him back behind bars.
You know what?
Investigators continued developing informants from within the gang.
You know you're supplying these guys with drugs, with guns.
They got the break they were looking for. Facing jail time on a drug charge, a member of the 1st and Kennedy crew agreed to cooperate. Finally, investigators learned the answer to the question that had most plagued them. Why did Benny Lee Lawson go into police headquarters and kill 2 FBI agents and an MPD sergeant?
Yeah, Jimmy.
It started the night Kobe Mowat, Jermaine Graves, and Benny Lee Lawson broke into the home of William Ragland. The trio's plan had been to rob drug dealer Gerald Gaither. Jermaine Graves became frustrated by Gaither's refusal to cooperate, and he snapped, killing 3 of the residents. Overwhelmed, Benny Lawson vomited outside the home. To Mowat, it was a sign of weakness.
I'm scared, man. Jimmy, man, what's going on?
The informant continued. When Lawson was brought in for questioning by investigators, Mowat was sure Lawson had snitched. He began to tell others in the crew that Lawson was cooperating.
He was sitting around, you know, we was at the barbershop.
Benny hated snitches. He hated them. He actually pistol whipped one individual whom he thought was snitching, and probably hated him more than any other crew member. So to have Kobe think that he was ratting or snitching on him, and to go out to 1st and Kennedy Street crew and have the rest of the crew look at him as a snitch, we believe was more than he could handle.
Really?
For agents and investigators, it was now clear that Kobe Mowat, Jermaine Graves, and Benny Lawson had committed the triple homicide. Agents took their case to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Through these conversations and the cooperating witnesses, plus the information that the police had from the car stop the night of the triple murder, left us no doubt that they had enough to get a murder warrant for these guys for the triple murder.
It was also clear that Kobe Mowat was part of the reason Benny Lee Lawson murdered 3 investigators inside the Metropolitan Police Department. Agents finally felt ready to go before a grand jury and present their conspiracy case against Kobe Mowat and the entire crew. Among the 57 charges that were handed down were indictments for nearly a dozen homicides, drug trafficking, armed robbery, kidnapping, and racketeering. Already in custody, Graves was charged with 3 counts of felony murder. An arrest warrant was issued for Kobe Mowat. Investigators returned to his house. This time, he wasn't home. The closets had been emptied. The place looked like it had been abandoned. In the trash, investigators found a receipt for a plane ticket. It appeared that Kobe had kept his promise to flee rather than go to jail.
And the plane ticket was for just a few days before we hit the place. And the plane ticket was from New York to Moscow. And at that point, we knew that Kobe had most likely fled not only the area, but most likely the country.
Mowat was 1 step ahead of the agents. They tried to pick up his trail in Russia, but he was nowhere to be found. Investigators discovered there was a flight departing to Africa soon after he landed in Moscow. A check of the passenger list revealed nothing.
There you are, sir.
Agents grew increasingly more frustrated. Mowat was slipping away. For 6 months, FBI agents and Washington, D.C. police tried to track fugitive Kobe Mowat. He could be hiding anywhere. An international manhunt was underway.
We literally went months without a break. We went through hundreds and hundreds of documents that we had obtained during search warrants, during various parts of the investigation, looking for overseas phone numbers, looking for overseas relatives, once again, without a break.
After several months, Agent John Kerr got a break. Through an informant, he uncovered the name of an ex-girlfriend of Kobe's.
We had come up with addresses for her. One of the addresses we came up with, we subpoenaed the toll records, and sure enough, we found a collect call from Kenya on one of her toll records. And this was shortly after he would have arrived in Africa.
Agents brought her in for questioning. She repeatedly denied knowing anything about Kobe Mowat's whereabouts.
He's out killing people.
Agents confronted her about the phone records. If she continued to withhold information, they would serve her with a grand jury subpoena. She decided to cooperate. She told investigators that Kobe had in fact called her several times from Nairobi, Kenya. He had not called her recently. She believed he might have moved on to Tanzania. The information was immediately passed on overseas.
You have to know where he is.
Mowat's phone call to his ex-girlfriend had originated from a hotel in Nairobi. A U.S. Department of State regional security officer in Kenya followed the lead.
We know he stayed in your hotel.
The hotel owner said he had no recollection of Kobe Mowat. Agent Giuliano received the news.
And it becomes very, very frustrating because, once again, we're getting no new information. We're not getting a break. And we know that the only tie that we have now is this hotel in Nairobi, Kenya. So we go back to the regional security officers and ask them to go back out and re-interview the individual.
Again, the hotel owner insisted he knew nothing about Kobe Mowat. When shown photographs, he seemed to hesitate. The regional security officer kept pressing. Finally, the owner asked for a guarantee that if he gave information, Kobe would never be told. The regional security officer agreed to protect him. He said Kobe had in fact been to his hotel, but he had left several months ago. He gave the security officer a number that Kobe had called while at the hotel. The call was to the East African country of Tanzania.
let him know he got this information.
It took agents a few days to determine why the hotel owner protected the First and Kennedy Street crew leader.
What we determined is that Kobe's mother was educated in Jamaica, and during that process she had befriended several individuals who ended up going to various parts of the world. She had an association with this hotel owner in Nairobi, and she had made the contact to protect Kobe and to help him.
You have a nice day. Thank you.
The phone number in Tanzania eventually led investigators to a local college professor. He was a friend of Kobe Mowat's mother. The FBI asked the Tanzanian National Police Department to follow the lead. The professor was unwilling to cooperate with the authorities.
Certainly not a student.
The National Police began their own investigation into Kobe Mowat's whereabouts in their country. As the search for the gang leader intensified in Tanzania, agents and police in Washington, D.C. continued to build their case against the First and Kennedy crew. They amassed volumes of evidence through surveillance and informant testimony over the previous year.
There were about 20 to 25 Metropolitan Police Department officers and FBI special agents working on this investigation around the clock, whether it was determining phone records or uncovering new murders that these guys had committed over the years.
On September 14th, 1995, officers and agents executed over a dozen arrest warrants. They searched for any indication of the gang leader's whereabouts in Africa. They found nothing. They collected additional evidence of a criminal enterprise. They confiscated financial records, guns, drugs, and gang paraphernalia.
Stay right there. Don't move.
Some of those arrested agreed to cooperate in exchange for less jail time. Investigators were slowly taking all of the gang members off the streets. In Tanzania, the search for Kobe Mowat was heating up. The National Police Force developed their own informants and learned that Mowat had in fact been in contact with a university professor.
I don't know anything about Kobe. Perhaps I could take you on a small...
They returned to interview him. He once more denied knowing anything about Kobe. Threatening the Jamaican-born professor with deportation, the Tanzanian police convinced him to reconsider. Finally, he admitted to helping Mowat find a place to hide out. He offered to take the authorities there.
And this hut is literally out in the middle of the tribespeople who are living in straw huts or are actually just living on the ground, right amongst the wild animals and amongst where they grow their crops.
It was the last place on earth authorities would have thought to look for Mowat. Unaware that the professor had betrayed his location, Mowat was surprised to see the police approaching his hut. He set fire to anything that could potentially identify him. But the police quickly moved in and doused the flames.
What did I do?
While they searched for a reason to place him in custody, they never told Mowat why they were there.
They also determined that out in the back, he's growing a small amount of marijuana, or what they call bangi. And in that part of the country, it's against the law. And the penalty is 10 years in prison or $100. So they brought him in based on that premise, telling him that he was going to be incarcerated for that.
Investigators in Washington received the news that Mowat was in custody, but time was working against them. The Tanzanian police could only hold Kobe on the possession charge for a short period. As a drug trafficker, Mowat had plenty of cash on hand to pay the $100 fine. After days of diplomatic wrangling, the arrangements for Mowat's extradition to the United States were finalized. Agent Giuliano and Detective Brigadini traveled to Tanzania to take him into custody. Investigators were finally face to face with the man who had eluded them for over a year.
When he came in, Kobe looked tired, and he looked like he had been defeated. We explained to him what the charges were, that he was being removed to the United States, that he had been indicted in the United States for a variety of charges, including several counts of first-degree murder and racketeering.
Mowat was on his way back to the United States, where he and fellow gang members faced 57 indictments. Kobe Mowat and Jermaine Graves would be convicted on all counts. They were each sentenced to 35 years in a federal prison. Mowat's capture in Africa allowed investigators to get the remaining First and Kennedy crew members off the streets.
When we brought Kobe back to the United States, he just had a domino effect on the rest of the crew members. Eventually, every crew member pled guilty because they felt and actually told us that once they saw that we had found Kobe in East Africa and brought him back, that they felt they didn't stand a chance.
FBI agents and D.C. police worked tirelessly to bring justice to the victims of gang violence. But this case was also personal. Only after the entire gang was in jail could they have a sense of closure and feel they had vindicated the deaths of their friends, Sergeant Hank Daly and FBI agents Mike Miller and Martha Dixon Martinez. For Agent John Kufta, who barely survived the attack at police headquarters, the implications of this case were far-reaching.
When this group was locked up, I think it sent a clear message to other criminal organizations out there operating in the District of Columbia and in that tri-state area there, that the FBI and the DC police will go to whatever lengths are necessary if it takes them to other continents to track you down and find you and bring you back to the United States to justice.